Dear friends, I am sincerely glad to welcome the hierarchs of the Russian Orthodox Church, clergy of other traditional denominations, representatives of public organizations, and the heads of diplomatic missions accredited in Moscow. We have gathered in the final days of the Easter period, but this does not diminish the joy of being able to congratulate one another on the bright resurrection of Christ, the main Orthodox holiday, a symbol of spiritual renewal, hope, and faith. It is deeply symbolic that this year our gathering takes place just a few days after the people of Russia and all progressive humanity solemnly celebrated the 80th anniversary of the Great Victory. We remember very well how, following the sacred particles of the holy fire, the precious particles of the eternal flame from Alexander Park were also carefully brought to many different cities across our vast motherland. And of course, taking this opportunity, I would like to congratulate everyone not only on the holiday of the bright resurrection of Christ, but also on the anniversary of the Great Victory. Our country made a decisive contribution to the defeat of Nazi Germany, to the liberation of Europe and the world from the Brown Plague. The mortal danger at that time united our entire people around a single goal, the uncompromising struggle against the German fascist invaders. The immortal feat of all the peoples of the Soviet Union would have been unthinkable without the spiritual guidance of the clergy, who, together with their congregations, bravely endured all the hardships of the wartime years. The Russian Orthodox Church organized fundraising for the needs of the defense, provided significant moral support to soldiers and civilians, including those who found themselves in territories temporarily occupied by the enemy. It harshly condemned traitors and collaborators in its prayers and sermons. And today, every year on May 9th, parishes of the Russian Orthodox Church in various parts of the world hold services for the repose of the souls of fallen soldiers, offer toasts to the living, and pray for peace and tranquility on our planet. Your Holiness, history knows of instances when opposing sides agreed to a temporary Easter ceasefire. However, the ceasefire declared by Russian President Vladimir Putin for Easter, as well as his initiative for a ceasefire on Victory Day, were, as you know, ignored by the Zelensky regime. This comes as no surprise to us, nor to any objective outside observers. Since the violent seizure of power in 2014, the Kiev junta has systematically eradicated everything in any way connected to Russia, the Russian language, culture, traditions, and Russian language media. And the Kiev regime does not leave canonical orthodoxy alone either. We see this happening. A tragic and at the same time vivid example of its inhumane nature has been the years-long persecution of the country's largest denomination, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which the authorities entrenched in Kiev have brought to the brink of legal dissolution. Seizures of churches, acts of vandalism, and attacks on priests and parishioners continue unabated. A testament to this blasphemous policy is the desecration of believers' feelings through the organization of, I quote, inventory and verification of the historical and scientific value of the relics of saints in the country's main monastery, the Kiev Patriarch Lavrov. This work has been assigned to veterinarians. These acts of sacrilege are carried out with the connivance and even support of many European countries, where the specters of neo-Nazism and Satanism are rearing their heads. I want to assure everyone present that Russia will not abandon the Orthodox people of Ukraine in their time of trouble and will ensure that their legitimate rights are respected and that canonical Orthodoxy regains its central place in the spiritual life of the people on Ukrainian lands. The guarantee that these goals will be achieved is the position of the Russian Federation on a just resolution of the Ukrainian crisis created by the West. This position was once again unequivocally reaffirmed yesterday by President Putin following his telephone conversation with the President of the United States, Trump. The Russian state and our ministries will continue to coordinate their efforts on the international stage with the Russian Orthodox Church. It is gratifying to see that the constructive activities of the Moscow Patriarchate are expanding in many parts of the world. The patriarchal exarchates of Africa and Southeast Asia are developing rapidly, and the number of parishes abroad is growing. A simple truth is confirmed. Wherever a person may live, if he is a decent person, he will always be drawn to those who embody enduring spiritual and moral values that are common to all major religions, cultures, and civilizations. We highly value Your Holiness's dedicated efforts to strengthen the unity of Orthodox believers and to protect Christians from the threats of terrorism and religious fanaticism. We are particularly concerned about the situation in the Middle East, especially in Syria, where groups of radical militants are carrying out real ethnic cleansing and mass killings of people based on their nationality and religion. It is truly astonishing how easily the West often overlooks numerous crimes in various parts of the world, especially if these crimes do not directly interfere with the West's ongoing efforts to advance its global agenda for its own purposes. Cling to fading dominance and try to continue living at the expense of others. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs highly values the contribution of the Russian Orthodox Church to improving the situation in world affairs and preventing the deepening of dividing lines along ethnic and religious lines. We are ready to further expand cooperation with the Moscow Patriarchate and with the representatives of all other faiths in our country in the interests of upholding ideals, goodness, and justice, and deepening broad international cooperation. In conclusion, allow me once again to congratulate you, Your Holiness, and all our dear guests present here on the main Orthodox holiday, and to wish everyone good health, kindness, peace, and well-being. Thank you.
Dear Sergei Viktorovich, most reverend bishops, dear brothers and sisters, I would like to warmly congratulate all of you on the bright holiday of Easter. I thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for returning to the tradition of holding Easter gatherings, which had to be suspended due to the pandemic in 2020. And today's reception has once again brought together within the walls of this historic mansion representatives of the largest religious communities, government and public figures from Russia and abroad, as well as diplomats. This year, we are marking the 80th anniversary of the Great Victory. It was achieved at the cost of the heroism of our soldiers and millions of homefront workers. In this feat, immortal courage and love for the motherland were revealed. The Russian Orthodox Church honors the memory of all those who gave their lives for the freedom of our people and thanks the Lord for the gift of peace won at such a high price. Just as it was then, our Church, whose children number in the millions across many different countries and on every continent, continues its ministry in a rapidly changing world, and alas, a world that is not only changing quickly, but also becoming increasingly troubled. The mission of the Church is to help people find the meaning of life. This is the main goal, to fill a person's inner world with experience that restores spiritual strength and to offer comfort in times of trial. I rejoice when I see young people in churches noticing their genuine interest in church tradition and their desire for spiritual growth. But the forces of evil do not leave people in peace, and so our world does not become any safer. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, as the Holy Scripture says, but against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And these spirits, the spirits of evil in the heavenly realms, carry out their terrible program of destroying human existence through the actions of people on the personal, family, social, state, and international levels. Therefore, everything that the Church testifies to based on its 2,000-year experience regarding the power of evil is not a fantasy. If it were a fantasy, everything would have collapsed long ago if this assertion were not based on experience and facts. Everything would have collapsed long ago. But since for 2,000 years this has been based on both experience and real facts, we continue to assert that ontological forces of evil are present, and can be present both in individuals and in society, in organized groups, and can set goals for themselves that outwardly may seem harmless, but in their strategic intent are always connected with the destruction of the human person, the weakening of the spiritual and moral strength of society, and ultimately with the ruin of the human race. I also want to say that a lot of good things are happening now, including in the sphere of spiritual life. The miracle of the revival of faith in our country. But still, we remember, at least the older generation does, what enormous efforts the superpower devoted to ensuring that there were no religious, as they called them, superstitions, financial, ideological, that is, intellectual, political resources, and finally, repression. No other party, no other social group in our country ever faced as much effort, as much determined effort, directed against them as the Church and faith did, in order to make absolutely sure she did not exist. And yet, here we are today. Do we have a division? Like Stalin once asked, and how many divisions does the Pope have? That was in fact a misguided question. We have no divisions. The Church has no divisions. The Church does not use force to persuade. But the very fact that faith truly exists and endures in the hearts of millions and billions of people all over the world demonstrates that this is not a myth. Not a myth. Name me any myth that has lasted this long. Name me even a single myth, including political myths, that has withstood what is called the test of time over several generations. And here we're talking about millennia. So let's just think about that. So, of course, as you might expect, our Church truly stands as a witness to this victorious power of good, the power of God, which, according to the Word of God, is also manifested in human weakness. Weakness means frailty. How can strength be manifested in weakness? A weak person, if he can barely walk, won't be able to cover any distance. If his health is poor, he can't manage without the help of medicine or doctors. And just to be able to lie down and rest, to push forward some kind of personal agenda. But this weakness, which was manifested in the real lives of people, because with rare exceptions, mostly in the Middle Ages, ordinary believers never possessed any special strength, yet strength was revealed in weakness. I rejoice when I see, and I want to say it again today, young people in churches, people who are interested in studying their tradition, the spiritual tradition of their people. But of course, on the other hand, we also watch with concern as religious life is degrading in the powerful Western countries. That is a fact. It is a fact that requires no proof. So what? Some believe that this degradation is not very important because other areas and factors of human life, on the contrary, are being strengthened thanks to capital, science, education, and so on. But there are areas of human life where neither education, nor science, nor capital can do anything. Let's take a concrete example. Marriage. After all, the rich get divorced, millionaires and billionaires become unhappy, and human lives are destroyed. Then what is marriage? At the heart of marriage is love. And love, can this feeling be described rationally? I'm not talking about physiology, that's a completely different topic. But what binds people together? What makes two into one? Can that be described rationally? No. This is the strongest proof of the existence of God. Where does love come from? Where did it originate? After all, the Darwinists were right in asserting that natural selection means the strongest survive. Exactly. Where there is no love, there is natural selection. Whether it's the Stone Age, the Middle Ages, or modern times, we witness natural selection in the fierce competition that certain political, economic, or criminal forces sometimes engage in. There you have it. But what is in the human heart does not come from evolution, nor even from historical experience. It is truly a blessing and a gift from God. And if this is a gift from God, we must acknowledge that God is somewhere near us. And when we rely on faith in the Lord God, then a gift such as the gift of love is also strengthened in our hearts, because it is the highest value, one that is not merely recorded in philosophical treatises, but in the divine commandments. The greatest value that a person possesses is the gift of love. Of course, we watch with concern as this gift, and indeed the very concept of marriage and family, is degrading, and how people's personal lives, the lives of individuals, families, and society are often truly falling apart. And how, of course, this has a very dangerous impact on the social community of people, including the life of states and nations. Now, I would like to move on to a more specific topic. I would like to express our deepest concern and anxiety about the situation in Ukraine. This is primarily related to the condition of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. There still remains the threat of legal liquidation and the actual destruction of Orthodox communities in this country. The question is, where are the rights of minorities or even non-minorities? And where is the protection of human rights and religious freedom? Why is no one in the West raising their voice? Why isn't this issue being brought up? Listen, the human rights and religious freedoms of a huge number of people in this country are being violated, but there is silence. It immediately brings to mind all those demands that were directed at our country. If there was politics involved here, then there was also politics involved there, ultimately aimed at the destruction of our motherland. But let's not talk about history now. If we simply return to the situation in Ukraine, then of course the situation is getting worse. On May 9th, a procedure was approved for inspecting religious organizations for their so-called affiliation with the Russian Orthodox Church. All Orthodox believers, except for the schismatics, are affiliated. Because there was one church, it was a single church. What kind of affiliation are they talking about? So the authorities are primarily aiming to deprive the communities of their administrative centers and then to eliminate the communities themselves by taking away their churches and forcibly driving them into schism. The greatest pressure on Orthodox parishes is currently being observed in the Cherkasy and Chernivtsi regions, where violent seizures of churches are especially frequent and brutal. The Kiev authorities are concerned about the international publicity surrounding the persecution. Significant funds are being spent to justify the law banning the church abroad. Commissioned articles are being published in reputable Western journals, and tours of Ukrainian religious leaders have been organized in the US and Europe, where they assure everyone that Ukraine is a country of religious freedom, that there is no persecution here at all. But the success of this propaganda is doubtful. International human rights work creates problems for the Ukrainian authorities, preventing them from proceeding to the final destruction of orthodoxy in their country. Therefore, everyone working in this direction, even if immediate results may not be visible, should understand that this is one of the factors capable of stopping the destruction of one of the largest religious communities in the world. Nevertheless, the persecution of our church, of course, as everyone knows, which was initiated by anti-Russian forces in Western countries in addition to Ukraine, is at this moment also being carried out in Moldova, in the Baltic states, and especially in Estonia. On April 9th of this year, the Estonian parliament adopted amendments to the law on churches and parishes which outlaw the structures of the Moscow Patriarchate in the country. Where did Orthodoxy in Estonia come from anyway? It certainly didn't come from China or Paris. This is Russian Orthodoxy. For generations, you Orthodox people were raised within this value system, and it was specifically the churches of the Russian Orthodox Church that you attended. And now, before the eyes of all of Europe, this is not some recently emerged dubious religious community, but a community to which, for centuries, a significant part, and at certain points in history, the majority of those living in Estonia belonged, and it is now practically facing attempts to be erased from the spiritual and cultural map of this country. So, on April 9th, 2025, the Estonian Parliament adopted amendments to the law on churches and parishes, which outlawed the structures of the Moscow Patriarchate. With this decision, the Estonian authorities hope to force Orthodox believers to transfer to the jurisdiction of the Constantinople Patriarchate. And although the law was not approved by President Alar Karis due to its contradiction with the Estonian constitution and was sent back for revision, the threat of its adoption with only minor amendments still remains. In Lithuania, the authorities continue preparations to implement the Estonian scenario. In Latvia, the autocephaly of the Orthodox Church was proclaimed without much deliberation. Was it perhaps some patriarch, maybe some council, as has always been the case throughout history? No, it was the country's parlia, the parliament that simply proclaimed autocephaly, in a country where, by law, the church is separated from the state. What is this? Well, it's a violation of all laws on human rights, on religious freedoms, and the country's constitution. And what happened? Absolute silence. But we, for our part, should not remain silent, neither at the level of our public organizations, nor at the level of the state. This needs to be discussed, including on international platforms. This is an egregious case of violating religious rights and freedoms, and in this case, also the country's own laws. In the name of what? In the name of creating a system of oppression, specifically in this case, against the largest religious community. In Moldova, under the patronage of the authorities for the so-called Bessarabian metropolis of the Romanian Patriarchate, political pressure on the hierarchs of the Orthodox Church of Moldova has intensified. During Holy Week, border services prevented Archbishop Markel of Balci and Folești from flying to the Holy Land for the Holy Fire. Clergy members are demonstratively subjected to humiliating searches and interrogations when crossing the state border. The blatant discrimination faced by our believers awaits an appropriate response and a fair assessment from the international community. I would like to note that in dialogue with the leadership and representatives of many global Christian and other religious communities, the Russian Church finds understanding for its concerns and a willingness to work together to protect freedom of religion. An important yet challenging area is cooperation with Western Christians. Despite emerging difficulties, ties with the Roman Catholic Church are being maintained. Very recently, its leader changed following the passing of Pope Francis, who had a very warm attitude toward the Russian Church. Well, now I can say this out loud because Dad has already passed on to another world. When high-ranking Vatican officials pressed him too hard to take a tougher stance toward our church, he responded with irritation, saying, "Don't make me quarrel with Kirill," and moved on. He maintained this position until his death and, of course, made his own contribution to strengthening the relationship between our churches. Now, the new pontiff is Pope Leo XIV. And we are, of course, ready to further develop our dialogue with the Vatican, including on issues such as the protection of traditional Christian moral values, peacekeeping, the protection of Christians from discrimination and persecution, environmental protection, and addressing many other humanitarian issues that are on the global agenda today. Relations with a number of Protestant communities in Europe are in crisis due to the significant departure of many of them from the very foundations of Christian life. Their doctrine or practice is becoming highly secularized, I would say, moving further and further away from true Christian faith in many of these Protestant communities. In contrast to Europeans, however, the Christian communities and denominations of the Global South mostly adhere to traditional views on issues of family and social morality. Our Church's cooperation with the ancient Eastern churches is characterized by trust and significance. Their leaders and high-ranking representatives express support for canonical orthodoxy in Ukraine and condemn discriminatory measures against our Church. In this context, the existence of such countries as Armenia, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, India, Ethiopia, and Eritrea is, of course, an important factor in strengthening the ties between Russia and the Russian Church with the peoples and religious groups in these countries. Our Church also continues to consolidate Christian denominations in the post-Soviet space, particularly through the Christian Interconfessional Advisory Committee. This platform makes it possible to build trusting relationships and coordinate positions on pressing issues of modern life. We also maintain a broad dialogue with leaders and organizations of non-Christian traditional religions, both in neighboring countries and further abroad. The Church contributes to the maintenance of intercultural and interreligious communication. Many high-level delegations from Islamic countries visit Russia, and they speak with great satisfaction about the level of interreligious relations in our country. I am confident that our domestic experience of cooperation among religious communities will be in demand abroad as well, including for strengthening Russia's relations with key partners in the Global South. At all times, it has never been easy to follow God's commandments. But it is precisely this ability and determination in a person that help to transform the world around us based on faith, goodness, and mercy, honest work and creation, good neighborliness, and mutually respectful relations between peoples. I wish everyone present, of course, good health, wisdom in making and implementing decisions, and God's blessing in your labors. Thank you for your attention.
What will they show? Now, I would like the patriarchal decree to be formally announced here and now.
By decree of His Holiness Patriarch Kirill of Moscow and all Russia, the following have been awarded honors of the Russian Orthodox Church. In recognition of his contribution to the development of church-state relations and in connection with his 75th birthday, Sergei Viktorovich Lavrov, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, is awarded the Order of the Holy and Right-Believing Prince Alexander Nevsky, First Class of the Russian Orthodox Church.
When presenting the order, we proclaim in Greek axios, which means worthy. I proclaim in Russian, worthy.
Worthy, 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 truly worthy.